The world of Epsilon Keln was a slow, cold marble of rockcrete and sacrifice. Its atmosphere permanently stained the color of a fading bruise by the countless foundries that scarred its surface. In the manufactory city of Veridium, the air tasted of rust and ozone, and the only light that ever pierced the perpetual smog glow was the soul stain of the Astronomicon, a distant and fading headache for the few psychers born there. Elara was not born a sanctioned psycher. She was born in the lower hive's deep sumph, in a hab unit that trembled with the rhythmic pounding of the great hydraulic presses 7 levels above. Her first vision came not as a dream, but as a waking overlay of reality. She was 6 years old, clutching a ration bar, when the gray walls of her hab stream bled into sudden, terrifying clarity. She saw the rivets in the walls pop like blisters. She heard the screams, not from the present, but from a future moment, a sharp, collective shriek of metal and mortals, followed by an absolute, deafening silence. She dropped the ration bar and began to cry, not from fear, but from a profound, soul-deep grief for the thousands of lives she felt snuff out in that future instant. Her parents, dutiful servants of the Omnissiah, reported the incident to the local Adeptus Ministorum confessor. The child was touched, they said, unclean. The confessor, a weary man named Hulbron, saw not heresy, but a potential tool. The Imperium hungered for prophets, for signs in the dark. He took her from the sump, not to a black ship, but to a small, fortified cloister adjacent to the Cathedral of the Cogs. There, she was studied, not dissected. They called her a seer child, a blessed recipient of the Emperor's glimpses. Her visions were infrequent, chaotic, and painfully vivid. She saw a laborer fall into a plasma core 3 days before it happened. She described the exact color of the fungus that would blight the mid-hive hydroponics a month later. Each time, her warning, once verified, was hailed as a divine miracle. Hulbron's star rose. With each correct prediction, the Archdeacon of Veridium took notice, then the planetary governor. Elara, now 10, was moved to a gilded chamber in the cathedral's upper spires. She was dressed in white and gold, called the Little Saint of the Cog. They fed her soft foods and hymns, and asked her to look. The pressure became a constant hum in her skull, a second heartbeat. The visions began to change. They grew darker, wider, bleeding from isolated incidents to vast, panoramic horrors. She saw the great orbital dockyards of Keln's Belt, where the Imperial Navy frigates were repaired, sheathed in a strange, rippling shadow. She saw the faces of naval officers melting like wax under a light that was wrong. She saw the distant gas giant, Keln's Watch, weeping tears of fire. She tried to explain these visions to Hulbron, her voice small and trembling. "The light is wrong, Father. It drinks the stars. It comes from the quiet place between the ships." Hulbron, now a high confessor, patted her head. He transcribed her words, but in his reports to the governor and the sector command, he filtered them. He spoke of potential xenos, shadows, and possible warp instability, careful not to alarm his patrons with the ravings of a child. The true, grotesque scale of her prophecy was lost in translation, distilled into manageable military concerns. The subsector command, already straining under orc raids in a neighboring system, dispatched a single aging cruiser, the Emperor's Benediction, to investigate the Keln's Belt dockyards. It was a gesture, a political sop to the increasingly influential cult of the Little Saint. They did not understand. They could not understand. The shadow Elara saw was not in the dockyards. It was using them. It was the reason for the strange, perfect silence that had lately fallen over the maintenance crews stationed there, a silence reported as improved efficiency. The thing in the darkness had already arrived. It was listening, and the approach of the Emperor's Benediction was not an investigation. It was a dinner bell. The Emperor's Benediction was a vessel of old scars and weary spirits. Its captain, Arvin Sol, had spent 40 years paddling the dull, bureaucratic edges of the subsector. The order to investigate potential anomalies at Keln's Belt felt like another clerical duty, a box to be checked before returning to the more tangible threat of orcs. His ship emerged from the warp at the system's edge. The translation, a sickening lurch that left a taste of copper in the mouth. The void here was cold, darker than it should have been. The familiar, comforting ping of the dockyard's navigational beacons was absent. There was only a hollow static on the Vox, punctuated by what sounded like wet, rhythmic scratching. Silent running. Weapons to low charge. "Bring us in on passive scanners only," Saul ordered. A knot of old, instinctual dread tightening in his gut. The picked feeds from the long-range augers resolved slowly. The orbital dockyards of Keln's Belt hung in the darkness, a twisted skeleton of gantries and dry docks. No running lights, no drive signatures. The great frigate Heart of Veridium was still clamped in the primary dock, its hull seemingly intact. But as the Benediction drifted closer, the details sharpened into horror. The metal of the gantries was not gray, but a mottled, fleshy black, like necrotic tissue. Pulsating veins of phosphorescent green ran across the surfaces, throbbing in a slow, syncopated rhythm. Organic-looking spires, like jagged teeth or fossilized coral, had erupted from the station's cores, piercing hulls and decks. There were no bodies, only strange, polished mounds of what looked like bone ash piled at the intersections of walkways. On Veridium, Elara screamed. It was a raw, physical thing that tore from her throat in the middle of a state banquet held in her honor. She collapsed, her white robes pooling around her as she convulsed on the polished marble floor. The vision was not a glimpse this time. It was an invasion. She was there, on the Benediction's bridge. She felt Captain Soul's cold terror as the picked screen revealed the truth. She heard the first, whispered shriek over the internal Vox as a maintenance servitor, its casing now fused with chitinous plating and sporting a lamprey-like maw, tore into a crewman in the lower decks. But more than that, she felt the hunger of the thing that had made this. It was a cold, vast, and patient intelligence. It wasn't just consuming biomass. It was consuming information, memory, experience. It was learning the shape of humanity from the inside out. And it was doing so with the meticulous cruelty of a surgeon. There in the walls, she choked out, blood flecking her lips as the governor's guards rushed to her. The silence! It's not empty. It's full of them. It followed the light. It followed my light. Hulbron was at her side, his face pale. "What is it, child? Speak clearly for the Emperor." "Genestealer," she whispered the word, a blasphemy in this holy place. But it was more than that. This was no simple brood. This was a perfected, orchestrated infiltration. The cult had not risen from the underhive. It had descended from the void, a pure strain vanguard that had quietly, perfectly, hollowed out the Imperium's strategic repair facility. And now, it had a naval cruiser on its doorstep. The Benediction's doom was swift and methodical. Boarding pods, not of Imperial design, but grown from biomatter, fired from the corrupted station. They slammed into the cruiser's hull, dissolving it like acid. Hybrids clad in the tattered remains of dockworker uniforms and Navy crew fatigues poured forth, moving with a terrible, unified purpose. Captain Soul died on his bridge, a four-armed aberration with the face of his former first mate driving a talon through his chest. The last broadcast from the Emperor's benediction was not a distress call. It was a chorus of distorted, atonal humming, the victory hymn of the Hive. News of the Benediction's loss reached Veridium as a garbled, frantic, astropathic death cry. The subsector command, now reeling, finally comprehended the magnitude of the threat. A Genestealer cult, not on some backwater agri-world, but at the heart of a vital naval infrastructure hub. Panic, cold and bureaucratic, set in. The first response was denial, then a torrent of frantic orders. The Veridium system was quarantined. No ship in, no ship out. The planetary defense forces were mobilized, but the orders from the governor's palace were fractured, paranoid. Were the cultists already on the planet? Had the taint spread? Suspicion fell on the lower hive, the migrant worker gangs from the dockyards. Purges began in the sump, brutal and indiscriminate, fueled more by fear than evidence. In her spire, Elara was dying by inches. Each death in the growing chaos below was a pinprick of light going out in her mind. She could feel the psychic beacon of the burgeoning cult, a sickly, seductive pulse emanating from the belt, calling out to the starless void. It was a lighthouse, and something was now answering. Her visions became constant, unbearable. She saw the approach of the Hive Fleet, a tendril of Leviathan that had been lurking in the galactic rim, drawn not by chance, but by the cult's perfected psychic summons. She saw its shadow fall upon Keln's watch, the gas giant igniting into a brief, terrible funeral pyre as the bioships harvested its volatiles. She saw the skies over Veridium darken with descending spores, each one a coffin and a womb. "You must make them listen," she begged Hulbron, her body now frail as a bird's. "It is not just the cult. It is the fleet, the great devourer. It comes for the feast they have prepared. They must burn the belt. They must scorch the orbitals. They must—" Hulbron stared at her, his faith curdling into something harder, more pragmatic. The little saint was no longer a beacon of hope. She was the herald of total annihilation. Her prophecies, if spoken aloud, would cause a global panic that would shatter what little defense they could muster. Her very existence was now a security risk. He saw not a child, but a compromised asset. "You are tired, my child," he said, his voice devoid of its former warmth. "The strain has been too great. You must rest. The Emperor's loyal servants will handle this." He had her sealed in her chambers. Guards were posted not to protect her, but to contain her. Her visions were classified as potential psychic contagion. The official narrative shifted. The tragedy at the belt was spun as a tragic but contained Xenos infestation, now being dealt with by brave Imperial Navy elements rushing from the neighboring Skara sector. The populace was fed lies wrapped in patriotism. Hope was manufactured like a munition, but Elara's truth was a poison, and it seeped out. A junior astropath, who had felt the edges of her night terrors, broke under the strain and screamed the truth into the local psychic choir. The seer's aide, a young scribe who loved her as a sister, smuggled out fragments of her ravings onto data slates, spreading them into the hive's undercurrents. The cult, planet-side and exquisitely aware of the prophet who had sensed them, moved. Their agents within the PDF and the Administratum ignited their long-prepared sabotage. Power grids in the mid-hive failed. Water recyclers spewed toxic sludge. Communicator towers broadcast the cult's hypnotic hum, throwing whole districts into a frenzied uprising or a catatonic stupor. The planet began to tear itself apart from the inside, a pre-digestive spazzing before the main course arrived. And high above, in the suddenly silent void where the Kelnsbelt dockyards had been, the first organic shadows began to blot out the stars. The vanguard organisms of Hive Fleet Leviathan had arrived. The system's quarantine had not kept the enemy out. It had locked the prey in. The first spores fell not on the industrial wastelands, but on the great cathedral of the cogs itself. They were the size of ground cars, glistening and viscous, punching through the stained glass depictions of the Omnissiah and exploding in the nave, releasing a mist that dissolved stone and flesh alike. The ensuing panic was absolute. The ordered lines of the Planetary Defense Force collapsed into desperate, isolated firefights in the streets. The cult's uprising, now open and triumphant, saw hordes of hybrids and mind-slaved thralls surging from the lower hive, their psychic choir, a physical wall of noise that shattered windows and sanity. In her sealed chamber, Elara felt the hive mind's approach like a migraine that encompassed the world. It was a consciousness of infinite hunger, a void that sought to fill itself with every memory, every spark of life that was Veridium. The cult's beacon was a shining, delicious trail of breadcrumbs leading directly to the planet's heart. She could feel the individual bioships in the upper atmosphere, vast and monstrous as continents, birthing the reign of death. She could feel the alien sentience of the hive mind brush against her own shredded psyche. It saw her, not as a person, but as a node of data, a unique, flickering flame of prescience. It wanted to taste that, to understand it, to add it to the galactic catalog of consumed things. Her door exploded inwards, not from the guards outside, but from within, warped by the psychic pressure boiling inside her. She stood, a figure of terrifying calm in the center of the maelstrom. Her eyes were no longer the eyes of a child. They were windows into the cosmic storm of a devoured future. Hulbron stumbled in, his robes torn, a last pistol in his hand. He was not there to save her. He was there to silence the source of the truth, to perform one last, damning service to an Imperium that was already dead on this world. "You brought this," he snarled, his faith now entirely replaced by blame. "Your visions, they called it. You are the conduit." Elara looked at him, and in that look, he saw everything. He saw his own death, not by her hand, but by a ripper swarm that would find him in the ventilation shaft he planned to escape through. He saw the cathedral collapsing, the governor's palace a bubbling pit of biomatter, the last starship exploding in the docks as 100 barbed strangler vines coiled around its hull. She showed him, in an instant, the absolute futility of his rage. "I did not call it," she said, her voice echoing with the whispers of a billion lost souls. "I merely saw the dinner table being set. They were here long before I was born. You asked for a prophet, Father, and the universe, in its cruelty, provided one. You just didn't want the truth," she foretold. A tremor, deeper than any quake, shook the spire. The shriek of tearing metal was drowned out by a greater shriek, the psychic death cry of a city being digested. The hive ships were beginning their planetary consumption, releasing digestive enzymes into the atmosphere that fell as corrosive, blood-red rain. Hulbron fired. The last bolt vaporized a centimeter from Elara's forehead, dissipated in a corona of actinic blue energy. Her own psychic gift, no longer a subtle sight, had erupted into a storm shield of pure, desperate will. The effort buckled her knees, but she remained standing. "They are coming for me now," she whispered, blood streaming from her nose and ears. The Great Devourer. It wants the map in my mind. It wants to see all the possible ends, all the paths of fate, so it can choose the most efficient one. I cannot allow that. She turned from the broken priest and walked towards the shattered, open wall of her chamber, looking out over the dying city. The sky was a kaleidoscope of horror, falling spores, streaking bioplasma, and the immense tendril-like shadows of the hive ships themselves, descending through the poisoned clouds. The psychic call of the cult was a triumphant, shrieking chorus, but beneath it, she could feel the deeper, silent call of the hive mind. It was a gravitational pull on her soul. She had one last choice: to be consumed, her gift added to the enemy's arsenal, or to use that gift to strike one last, futile blow. She gathered the shards of her prescience, not to see the future, but to channel all the possible, terrible futures into a single, screaming point of psychic feedback. She would not be a map, she would be a detonation. The psychic blast was not a weapon in any conventional sense. It could not shatter a hive ship or halt a swarm. It was a death rattle, but one amplified across the spectrum of fate. Elara did not attack the hive mind. That would be like a single cell trying to attack a galaxy. Instead, she targeted the one fragile link she could touch, the Genestealer cult's psychic beacon, the very signal that had drawn the Devourer to Veridium. She poured into it, not defiance, but truth, the absolute, unvarnished truth of their existence. To the four-armed priest in the deep sump, she showed the moment its beloved star children would descend not as saviors, but as indiscriminate digesters, dissolving the faithful and the uninitiated alike into the same primordial soup. To the hybrid magus plotting in the governor's bunker, she flooded its mind with the hive mind's perspective the cult was not offspring, but bait, a tasty morsel of organized biomass to be gratefully scooped up. She showed every thrall the exact biological mechanism of their impending absorption. The loss of self so total, it made damnation seem a mercy. For one searing nanosecond, the cult's unified psychic choir shattered into 10 billion individual screams of betrayal and existential horror. The perfect harmony of the broodmind fractured into a cacophony of alien despair. The effect on the hive mind was negligible, a flicker of irrelevant static in a symphony of consumption. But for the cult on Veridium, it was catastrophic. Their coordination, their fanatical certainty, evaporated. Hybrids turned on pure strains in confused rage. Maddened thralls shot their overseers. The uprising, moments from total victory, imploded into a chaotic, suicidal free-for-all in the streets. It bought nothing. It saved no one. The hive ships continued their descent. The digestive rain melted city sectors into nutrient sludge. But it did something. It proved that even in the face of absolute consumption, a sliver of individual will could, for a moment, force the monster to blink. Elara's body could not contain the outflow. As the last of her prescient energy left her, a psychic backblast of titanic force erupted from her. It did not explode outward, but upward, a single blinding lance of stolen futures and grief-fueled light piercing the atmospheric gloom. It was a final, defiant signature scribbled on the night before the page was eaten. On the bridge of the hive ship Phagocyte Primus, the consciousness of the hive mind noted the anomaly. The tiny bright flash of coherent psychic energy was insignificant to its hunger, but interesting. The data point of a self-annihilating prescient species was rare. It was cataloged, analyzed for potential adaptive utility in consuming other psychic races, and then filed away. The Devourer learned. It always learned. Down on the planet, in the ruins of the cathedral spire, High Confessor Hulbron witnessed the light erupt from the child and then vanish. He saw her small form, now utterly empty, collapse to the floor. The psychic shockwave had spared him, leaving him horrifically, uniquely intact. He crawled to the edge of the shattered wall, looking out at the end of his world. The last thing he saw was not the monsters, but the faces of his own flock below, dissolving as the fleshy capillary towers of the hive ship breached the city's crust and began to drink. The silence that followed was not the silence of void, but the deep, organic silence of digestion. The screams had stopped. The shooting had stopped. There was only the wet, rhythmic sound of a world being consumed. The subsector was doomed. The tendril of Leviathan, its appetite whetted by the rich, pre-prepared meal of Veridium and its naval assets, turned now towards the nearby agri-worlds and the densely populated hive spire of Selena Tertius. The quarantine had failed. The warnings had been silenced. The Imperium's response, now truly galvanized by the loss of an entire system, would be tragically, characteristically slow. By the time the battle fleet Scarus arrived with cyclonic torpedoes and cardinal fire, there would be nothing left of the Veridium system but a slowly expanding cloud of debris and a few haunted, echoing warp whispers that astropaths would hear as a child's fading sob. No monument would be raised for Elara, the child prophet. Her name would be struck from records, her existence purged as a catastrophic security failure. The official history would simply state that the Veridium system was lost to Tyranid consumption after a brave but futile defense. The truth that they had been betrayed by their own need for comforting lies, that they had imprisoned their one true seer, and that her final act was to show the betrayers the emptiness of their own faith was a truth too dark, too poisonous, even for the grim darkness of the far future. Some truths are buried not because they are secret, but because they are fatal. And in the Warhammer 40,000 universe, only the fatal truths are real. The silence, after digestion, is not true silence. It is the absence of familiar sounds, replaced by a new, organic tapestry. The winds of Veridium no longer howled through hive canyons. They sighed through vast, porous chitin structures. The grinding of machinery was replaced by the gentle, ceaseless pulsing of nutrient arteries as wide as rivers. The hive fleet had done its work with a terrible, beautiful efficiency. All that remained was a hollowed-out geosphere being converted into raw materials, a lump of matter being assimilated into the great galactic gut. But the warp, that sea of souls and emotion, retained an echo. The final, concentrated burst of Elara's being, that lance of agonized prescience, had left a scar, not a physical one, but a psychic after-image, a stain on the fabric of reality. In the Imperium, where thought and memory have weight, the Veridium system now pulsed with a faint, sorrowful light. Navigators on passing vessels, light years away, would feel a peculiar, cold tug of melancholy when their course skirted its grave. Astropaths in the neighboring Scaris sector sometimes caught fragments of dreams that were not their own. The taste of rust, the smell of ozone, and the face of a pale child with eyes full of dead stars. This echo did not go entirely unnoticed by the Imperium. The Ordo Xenos of the Inquisition, forever dissecting the Tyranid threat, dispatched a single stealthy vessel, the Eternal Vigil, to survey the graveyard of Veridium. Its mission was coldly scientific: to gather data on post-consumption biosignatures, to scan for any anomalous hive fleet behavior. What its augmented logs discovered, buried in the psychic static, was the faint, impossible signature of a powerful, human psychic catalyst at the epicenter of the disaster. The data was conflicting, heretical. It suggested a conscious psychic event had occurred during the consumption, an event that briefly disrupted the victim species' cohesion. The report was filed under the highest levels of classification, a curiosity for the Magos biologist to ponder. The notion that a single human child could have affected a hive mind's feeding cycle, even for a moment, was deemed not just improbable, but dangerously inspirational. It was sequestered, lest some fool get the idea that individual sacrifice could matter against the endless swarm. Yet, stories have a way of slipping their chains. Among the crew of the Eternal Vigil was a junior interrogator named Valerius, a man whose own latent psychic sensitivity was a carefully kept secret. He had felt the echo himself, a grief so profound it had brought him to his knees in his quarters. He heard, not words, but the shape of Elara's final thought, a map of a doomed future, offered not in hope, but in warning. He did not see her as a saint or a hero. He saw her as the ultimate testament to the Imperium's failure. They had a prophet, and they had used her as a party trick until her prophecies became inconvenient, then treated her as a threat. Her gift had been a tool for petty political advancement, then a liability to be managed. Never was it considered a weapon to be honed, a truth to be acted upon. Valerius took the data fragments he dared to copy. He did not preach a new cult. He did not write a treatise. Instead, he used the story, whispered in the right ears, in the dark corners of inquisitorial fortresses, and amongst the disillusioned scions of the Astra Telepathica. As a cautionary tale, it became a dark parable of institutional blindness. "Remember Veridium," he would say. "Remember the child who saw the end. They made her an ornament, then a prisoner, and then the devourer made her a footnote. We are so afraid of the truth that we will help the enemy consume us just to avoid hearing it." The Hive Fleet moved on, a locust swarm of stars. Veridium's biomass was processed, distributed, became part of new organisms, new ships, new weapons aimed at the next world. The physical evidence of Elara, of Hulbron, of billions of souls, was gone, metabolized into the Great Hunger. But the echo remained, a tiny, persistent flaw in the perfect consumption. A whisper in the warp that said, "They saw us coming. They knew, and they still failed." It was a whisper that carried no hope, offered no redemption. It was grimdark to its core, a story not of noble sacrifice, but of wasted potential and catastrophic, cascading failure. It was the story of the Imperium itself, in microcosm. And in the 41st millennium, such stories are the only truths that last. The whisper, as all things did in time, reached a mind for whom it was not just a story, but a weapon. Decades later, in a labyrinthine archive on Terra itself, Inquisitor Valerius, now stripped of his rank and hunted as a radical for his unsettling methodologies, finally pieced together the full, horrific tapestry. He had cross-referenced the Eternal Vigil's data with suppressed astropathic death screams, with the service records of Captain Arvin's soul and his lost crew, with the financial ledgers showing the flow of wealth to High Confessor Hulbron's burgeoning ecclesiarchal faction. He saw not a tragedy, but a blueprint of how the Imperium, in its towering paranoia and bureaucratic inertia, systematically dismantled its own early warning systems. He did not seek to honor Elara's memory. He sought to replicate her curse. His heretical cabal, operating from the rusting hulk of a forgotten orbital plate, began a project they called the Penitent Engine. Their goal was not to create a psyker of power, but a psyker of specific, painful sight. They abducted children who showed the faintest glimmer of prescience from the Black Ship's processing cues. They subjected them not to the soul binding, but to a regime of controlled, traumatic visions, flooding their young minds with curated horrors, images of Genestealer infestations, of chaos cult symbology, of Xenos invasions. They sought to forge living psychic tripwires, sensitive only to the specific frequencies of hidden corruption. Most of the children burned out, their minds reduced to ash. A few became babbling wrecks. But one, a gaunt girl from a feral world with eyes the color of a twilight sky, began to produce results. She could look at a pict of a seemingly loyal Imperial official and whisper which tooth had been replaced by a subdermal cult implant. She could touch a data slate and feel the cold, lingering stain of warpcraft in its user's history. Valerius had created his own Elara, a weaponized prophet, stripped of everything but the function of seeing doom. He used her to purge 3 minor cults on a frontier world with brutal efficiency. He felt no triumph, only a cold validation. The Imperium's methods were slow and clumsy. His were direct and monstrously effective. He had proven that the mistake of Veridium could be turned into a tool. He became what he despised, a man so focused on preventing a tragedy that he willingly reenacted its darkest prologue. He became Hulbron, with better data and sharper scalpels. The girl, who he never named, simply called Subject Rho, finally broke during an operation to uncover a Slaneshi cell in a pleasure dome. The visions she received were not of cultists, but of Valerius's own future. She saw him, decades hence, a wizened, paranoid thing living in a fortress of skulls, surrounded by a coven of broken seers, their visions used to orchestrate purges that consumed entire innocent populations to ensure a single heretic died. She saw him become a different kind of cancer, one that believed it was the cure. She looked at him with Elara's same terrible, knowing emptiness. "You are building the very silence that doomed them," she whispered, her voice raspy from disuse. "You are not stopping the cycle. You are just another gear in the machine that grinds us all to dust." Valerius ordered her sedated, but the seed of her vision, her final prophecy, took root in his own poisoned mind. He had sought to weaponize the truth of Veridium, but the truth was far heavier than any weapon. It was a mirror. In his quest to avenge a child sacrificed to bureaucracy, he had created a system of sacrifice infinitely more personal and cruel. The echo of Elara had not provided a solution. It had only demonstrated, with perfect, recursive clarity, that in the grim darkness of the far future, there are no solutions. There are only patterns of failure, repeating in ever more sophisticated and horrifying iterations. The galaxy eats its prophets, and the would-be saviors so often become the architects of the next doom. Valerius's work continued, but now a shadow of doubt, cold and absolute, moved with him. He understood, at last, the full weight of the lesson. It was not a lesson on how to win. It was a lesson on how, inevitably, everything loses. The galaxy turned. The Hive Fleet tendril that consumed Veridium was eventually broken and scattered at the Battle of the Syrian Rift, its bioships blasted to molten slurry by the combined guns of the Imperial Navy and a clan of vengeful Iron Hand Space Marines. The victory was celebrated in dusty annals, another bloody notch on the crumbling edifice of the Imperium's defiance. No one connected the triumph to the forgotten, digested world that had been the fleet's first rich meal in the sector. Cause and effect were severed by time, bureaucracy, and the sheer, overwhelming volume of death. Yet, in a silent, sterile vault on Jupiter's moon of Callisto, within the most secret repositories of the Ordo Xenos, a single data crypt endured. It was labeled only Subject, Anomalous Psychic Resonance, Case Epsilon, Keln. Inside was Valerius's final unsent report compiled before his disappearance. It contained no pleas, no justifications. It was a dry, clinical dissection of the Veridium event and the subsequent Penitent Engine project. It ended with a stark conclusion. The prescient catalyst, designated Echo V, did not alter the tactical outcome. It did, however, create a persistent low-grade psychic anomaly, a mimetic hazard. The hazard is not one of corruption, but of recursive insight. Exposure to the full dataset carries a high probability of triggering a profound existential crisis in the operative, leading to catastrophic operational paralysis or radical, unpredictable agency. Recommend eternal sequestration. The truth of Veridium is not a weapon. It is a pathogen for the soul. A century after Valerius vanished, the crypt was accessed, not by an inquisitor, but by a mindworm, a specially bred cyber-augmented servitor of the Officio Assassinorum's Vanus Temple. It was parsing trillions of data points for patterns predictive of internal subversion. The cold, logical horror of the Veridium data file resonated with the mindworm's analytical protocols. It recognized a pattern of systemic failure, so perfect it was almost artistic. The file was flagged, not for human review, but for a deeper, more sinister purpose. The Vanus Temple deals in information as its chosen tool of assassination. They engineer collapses of trust, cascade failures of logistics, the subtle poison of a perfectly timed lie. The mindworm saw in the story of the child prophet a template for a new kind of execution, not of a person, but of a future. By identifying a population's nascent prophet, their potential Elara, and then using the Imperium's own predictable mechanisms of denial, suppression, and fear, one could guide that population into a preordained catastrophe. It was the ultimate application of Veridium's lesson. You did not need to attack your enemy. You merely needed to ensure they deafened themselves to the one voice that could save them. This twisted doctrine was codified into a shadow protocol, a ghost in the Vanus Temple's vast strategic machine. On a rebellious mining world named Thaumiel, it was first field-tested. A young, charismatic geologist began having visions of catastrophic plasma core collapses. The Vanus, through cutouts and manipulated data feeds, ensured her warnings were first celebrated, then scrutinized, then dismissed as the work of panic-mongering, and, finally, as possible collusion with the rebel elements. The populace, fed conflicting reports, turned on her. She was imprisoned as the rebellion flared. The precise series of mining disasters, she foretold, occurred, crippling the loyalist infrastructure and hastening the world's pacification by external imperial forces. The prophecy had been entirely correct, and ensuring it was ignored had been the key to victory. The Imperium had, knowingly this time, used the very blindness that doomed Veridium as a strategic weapon against its own people. The Echo of Elara had finally completed its grim journey, from a child's terrifying gift, to a suppressed truth, to a cautionary tale, to a radical's blueprint, and now to a sanctioned protocol of state-sanctioned betrayal. Her suffering had been metabolized by the very empire she had sought to warn, transformed into a tactical procedure for more efficient control. In the 41st millennium, even grief is not wasted. It is reverse-engineered into a quieter, more precise kind of murder. The story of the child prophet whose visions doomed a subsector was no longer a history. It was an instruction manual, and somewhere in the warp, the faint, sorrowful echo might have pulsed once, not with grief, but with a terrible, silent understanding that in the darkest of futures, the only fate worse than being ignored is being perfectly, coldly understood.